And top of the list of things you need to know about photosynthesis, and the reason I say it's top of the list is because this is often, if you look back at past exam questions, this is often the very first question they ask you about photosynthesis. And it's this. Now, sorry, I'll come back to what I mean by the question that they ask you in a second. But if you were to summarize photosynthesis, what's going on under the hood, in the leaf, in the cells, in the plant cells, and even more specifically inside those little cell organelles that we know where photosynthesis happens, those chloroplasts we talked about before, this is what's actually happening. In an overall way, carbon dioxide and water molecules are combined using light as an energy source. So light is, I put light, you notice here I put light, I add light to the left-hand side of this equation. Some people might see, you might see in some textbooks that the light is sitting on top of the arrow, and that's not strictly correct, right? Because the energy from the light actually ends up in the glucose molecule in the form of chemical energy. So what this, and this is like, this is, you know, the closest thing to magic you're ever going to see in the living world, because what we're saying here is that plants are able to make glucose, and even we could say one step further, that plants are able to make themselves, build themselves from air and water. That's effectively what photosynthesis is, right? It's this amazing, most unlikely process whereby some organisms a long time ago figured out this magic trick that they could take air molecules, simple carbon dioxide molecules from the air, and water molecules from the ground, which they transport up, they take up in the roots and they transport up the stem and out into the leaves. And in the leaves, they combine these air molecules, CO2, with water molecules, and they harness the energy from light, of which there's no shortage, generally, especially if you're not in Ireland. And they combine that to make food, to make glucose molecules. Those glucose molecules are what they use to make themselves. So what we're talking about here is, if you know those trees, what the biggest trees in the world are called giant sequoias, they're the giant redwoods. The biggest one of all, I think, is called General Sherman, I think is the name. It's what this famous tree, I think it's in Yosemite Park in the west coast of the States, in California somewhere. And these trees are like unfeasibly large. When you stand at the base of one, I haven't been to Yosemite, but I've been to sort of botanical gardens where there's giant redwoods, and they're ridiculously big trunks, right? Some of them are so big that they've actually, you can cut tunnels through them for cars. That's how big some of these giant redwoods are, right? But these giant redwoods are made out of air and water, almost entirely, right? So that's the kind of level of, magic that we're talking about here. But the other thing that we shouldn't forget is that, and this is just a sort of a byproduct, is that plants produce oxygen as well during photosynthesis. When I say it's a byproduct, like to them, it's largely just waste, because they produce far more oxygen than they ever need for respiration. So let's not forget this as well, right? Is that, and this is often something that students forget. It's not like plants do photosynthesis and other organisms do respiration, right? Plants do photosynthesis. They also spend all their time respiring. So day and night, plants are respiring, but only during the daytime are they doing photosynthesis. So during the daytime, they actually make loads of carbon dioxide and way more than they would need to do aerobic respiration. Okay, so this is the overview. However, this is not the version of this equation that you need. This is the word equation. They're never going to ask you for the word equation. They're going to ask you for the balanced chemical equation version. Okay, so this is the thing you need to commit to memory. And this is usually, like I said, it's not usually, but it's very often, go back through the years, you'll see this is a standard issue question to start off your photosynthesis question in the biology exam. So So you get 6 carbon dioxide molecules, so that's 6 CO2, combined with 6 water molecules, that's 6 H2O, and using the energy from light, which is trapped by this molecule chlorophyll, which is in the chloroplast we'll look at. Excuse me, that combination is used to make glucose, which is C6H12O6. And then you get a bunch of 6 oxygen molecules, which are, like I said, largely just released from the leaf and go off into the air, which of course is great for the rest of us who rely on the plants to supply us with oxygen. So plants are, if you think globally, right, and we think about the carbon cycle, and we think about global warming, we can think about the greenhouse effect, and think about all those things. Plants serve 2 major purposes in the biosphere, right, in the biological world. One, they are what we call carbon sinks. They suck carbon out of the air all the time. So those, the tropical rainforests, the Amazon, and so on, they're huge areas that we refer to geographically as carbon sinks, because carbon just pours into those forests, right? And it's sucked out of the air into the leaves, into the chloroplasts for photosynthesis. And at the same time, they pour out oxygen gas, which, all the organisms in the world rely on then to carry out aerobic respiration. So some of you may not have done this topic before. Don't be, put off if you're thinking this is major overload here. If you have done it before, and even if you have done it before, it can be, challenging, like I said. But we'll take it step by step. This is your first thing. You don't need to commit this to memory now, but it's something that you do need to at some stage put on your must-do list for photosynthesis. Okay, let's look at a few things. The first thing is they need chlorophyll. So plants, the only way they can do this is by having this molecule. And actually, it's not just one molecule. It's a collection of there are lots of different types of chlorophyll. Right? And there are different colors even. We think of chlorophyll as green. I've got green slides for this, right? But there's orange chlorophylls and there's red chlorophylls and there's some that are slightly yellow. What you never see is, there are all these different colors. Even sort of dark reds and almost verging on brown. So when you see plants, at this time of year, the leaves on the trees are changing colors. That's partly because some of the chlorophyll start to break down before others. And so you get these lovely color changes because maybe the green chlorophyll breaks down first, and then the red chlorophylls don't take as long to break down, and the yellow chlorophylls hang around a bit longer as well before they're broken down. And so you get these lovely color changes as different chlorophylls start to get lost, right? So where you only find these in chloroplasts. So plant cells need chloroplasts to do this. All plant cells have chloroplasts if they're doing photosynthesis, and the chlorophyll is entirely found inside those chloroplasts. We'll look at that in a bit more detail. Where do you find the leaves with the highest amount of where do you find the cells with the highest amount of chloroplasts? Well, if you kind of, as you might expect, you find them right at the top surface of the leaf. The very first layer of cells at the top of the leaf is where you find the highest density of chloroplasts, cells with the highest amount of chloroplasts in their cells. So we call that the palisade layer, right? That palisade mesophyll. We haven't done plant anatomy yet, so don't worry about it. We'll be coming back to that again in a couple of weeks. But just to say that makes sense, right? A leaf. So if you think about a leaf, it's a thin sort of a structure, right? And it's thin so that the light doesn't have to penetrate very far to get to those photosynthetic cells. It's flat and wide so that there's a large surface area for the leaf to be able to catch as much light as possible. Right? Large surface area is one of those phrases that you're going to wheel out quite a lot in answers to lots of questions. We'll come across that whole concept of increasing surface area. So it makes sense for leaves to be wide and flat. So wide for surface area, flat so that the light can penetrate easily to all the cells inside the leaf. So that's the one aspect of chlorophyll. I did say to you there's lots of different types of chlorophyll. So collectively, what characteristic they have in common is that they all are really good at trapping or absorbing light energy. So what I mean by light energy, we should get this straight. We're not talking about the heat from the sun, right? So you could say that there's radiation from the sun, and you can almost talk about it in two different ways, or break it up into two different types of energy. There's the heat energy that we get from the sun. There's also light energy. So the light we talk about, in order to get our understanding of how photosynthesis works, we talk about the light as being composed of particles of light, what we call photons, right? So often we think of light as kind of like a, it's a stream, or it's like there are beams of light or whatever. Well, for this purpose, and lots of physicists would think about light in the sense of there are little packages or particles of light called photons, right? So what chlorophyll is able to do is chlorophyll is able to trap those photons, or at least, trap the energy from those photons and pass it on to electrons that are in the chlorophyll molecule. So all atoms are composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And the electrons are the ones that are going around the nucleus, right? Hopefully you remember that from the junior cycle. And if you're not doing chemistry, that's all you really need to know about electrons. So they are negatively charged tiny particles that whiz around the nucleus in the middle. So they fly around the nucleus. And inside the nucleus, you've got protons and neutrons. Now, these electrons are high energy, they're moving around in orbits. And what chlorophyll is able to do is chlorophyll is able to trap the energy from the light, these photons, and transfer it to these electrons that are moving around. Of course, what that does is that gives these electrons extra energy. So we talk about them as being energized or excited. Either word is good. Somebody has a question. Is chlorophyll a protein in nature? Absolutely it is. Yeah, good question. Somebody just asked, is chlorophyll a protein? It very much is a protein. And it's one of a few proteins we're going to come across in this. So it's a protein that's highly adapted. In other words, it's very good at its function for trapping light energy. And not only trapping light energy, but passing that light energy to its electrons, which become then energized. So think of these electrons as, they're whizzing around the chlorophyll atoms, right? And they suddenly get this burst of energy, this jolt of energy, because the molecule has trapped the light energy. And then they become extra excited. They start to vibrate even more, okay? Now, in many cases, that nothing happens, right? They get all excited, and then they just calm down, and the energy is given off as heat. But what sometimes happens is that electron, the energy from that electron can be used, as we'll see, in a system to generate ATP molecules. Now, ATP molecules, if you haven't met them before, ATP molecules are the fundamental energy carrier in a cell. Right? They're a short-term sort of transport molecule for moving or supplying energy to wherever it's needed in the cell. So they're a short-term energy supply molecule, right? And so they provide energy. Where do they get their energy from? They get their energy from these electrons, these excited electrons. Where do the excited electrons get their energy from? From the light in the first place. So this is it. What we're looking at here, what we're going to be tracking is, we're going to be tracking the energy that's being carried by these electrons. So really, this story is about the electrons that are moving around the place in the pathways. So let's just start at the beginning of what happens when light hits chlorophyll. So if you imagine this funnel picture here, if you imagine in the chloroplast that inside the chloroplast, these bunches of chlorophyll molecules are arranged in a kind of funnel thing like this, okay? And light's coming in from the top. So you've got a whole collection of these chlorophyll molecules, and they're a mixture. They're not all identical, right? And so light hits one of the chlorophyll molecules. That chlorophyll molecule grabs the light energy, and that energy will then get passed around a bit like kind of like in pinball. If you know pinball, the game pinball. So the energy gets bounced around until it reaches a specifically very important. It's like a keystone chlorophyll molecule. We call that chlorophyll molecule the reaction center chlorophyll. And the reason it's so important, this reaction center chlorophyll, is because it's the one that's able to pass the excited electron, the electron that's got all this energy. It's able to pass its excited electron onto another protein that we just refer to as an acceptor molecule. It's an electron acceptor, okay? So it's a protein, but it's an electron acceptor molecule. So now this electron has left chlorophyll, okay? Now, just in the back of your mind, just remember, yeah, but hang on. You know, molecules just can't keep on losing electrons. They'll fall apart, and you're dead right, they would. But park that thought for a second, we'll come back to it. So what happens to this electron, this excited electron, once it's been taken by the acceptor molecule?